The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
Who else could it be? Me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to Training Camp Confidential, day number 5 of training camp. The Washington Commanders. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Pads are on. Football is officially back in the nation's capital. This is one of those mile marker moments for summer. If you're a fan of football, if you're a fan of this team, when you get to training camp, there's a ramp up period now. You know, having been a fan of football my entire life, pretty much, I've seen, and it's funny listening to guys like Zach Ertz talk. He's like, yeah, I've been in the league 12 years. Obviously, training camp has changed significantly since I first entered the league. Once upon a time, there was no ramp up period. You just got straight to it. There were 2-a-days. It was very physical, and things have changed drastically. And so this ramp up period features getting the players ready for padded practices like the one today. And it's not going to be all padded practices from here on out, but the significance is now they've officially popped the top on pads. Physicality is now a part of the schedule, and we can start to assess the offensive line, the defensive line, and start to separate those who are starters from those who are probably going to be backups. This is the real data collecting process and phase, if you ask me. And so really excited about what's to come from this point forward. So we're going to talk about practice itself. We had 2 veterans. We talked about this yesterday. 2 veterans step up to the podium today in Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner. So we heard from 2 of the guys who have assumed leadership roles here in Washington as veterans that have come in and really made their mark already on this roster and really on the organization as a whole. So we heard from them today, and then also obviously head coach Dan Quinn. So we'll get to what was said there a little bit later on in today's show, but I want to start by talking about practice. Training camp day number 5 to be exact. Again, as I stated already, I know I'm excited. First day of pads, which means you're going to get more physicality. There's going to be an emphasis on the run game. They were going to have red zone. Dan Quinn had already told us what the day was kind of going to look like. They wanted to get a lot of the run game done. They wanted to get some of that play pass, things going, and also red zone, right? So these were a lot of the things that you're going to see, but a lot of run game, because these are the things that haven't really been featured during the offseason and OTAs and the early portion of training camp. Now that the pads are on, you can really start to drive those things home, kind of see what you really have. So more of an emphasis put on the run game, blocks, proper fits, leverage, physicality on display in the first day of padded practice. 3rd straight practice of rookie tackle Brandon Coleman taking first team reps. Andrew Wiley was back at practice. So the significance there was you kind of got the feeling that the last couple practices where Coleman was getting first team reps, Cornelius Lucas had kicked over the right tackle. They were kind of maybe supplementing the fact that there was an injury to Wiley, albeit insignificant. He wasn't really practicing with the first team. He wasn't doing a lot of team drills in particular. And so Coleman getting first team reps at left tackle kind of felt like a byproduct of Wiley not being available and them kind of shuffling the deck a bit. It was twofold. It gave him an opportunity to get first team reps, but it was really also to cover up the fact that Wiley wasn't there. So the significance today was Wiley was back at right tackle, but Coleman was still getting first team reps. So that was the significance today. He took almost all of the first team reps, did Brandon Coleman. And we're going to talk about that today in particular because he's one of those guys that's sort of a wild card this year, especially with this rookie class. I think most of us expect the rookies to have an immediate impact. You know, with the roster that's turned over so heavily, you expect these rookies. And being that we didn't have, 8, 9 draft picks and 5 of them come in day 3, we had it the direct opposite. We had, I think, 9 draft picks, and of the 9, I think 5 or 6, I think 6 of them came in the first 2 days, right? If I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 came in the first 2 days. We had what? 3 seconds and 3/3, if I'm not mistaken, 2/3 in 3 seconds, I think. And then you had the first round pick. So 6 in the first 3 rounds, 2 days, and then you had the 3 guys in day 3. So a lot of those guys that you take in the first 2 days of the draft, you expect to come in and immediately impact. You take it a step further, we had a bunch of second round picks as well. So first and second rounders, you expect immediate dividends. Third rounders aren't that far behind, which was one of our, gripes with last year's draft, that you weren't getting anything out of the guys you took in the, third round in particular, fourth round, all of that stuff. We got a little something out of Quan Martin last year, maybe not enough that you would be really excited about what you got out of your second round pick in his rookie season, but it's led us to feel good about him going into his second year. Anyway, we're going to talk about Brandon Coleman today because I think he is one of the true wild cards of this particular draft class and offseason, to be honest with you, because if he works out, we could have something, right? One of the biggest needs, and I still think it's going to be a massive need come next year, no matter what happens with Coleman moving forward, is tackle. Right now, if Coleman isn't starting at any point this season and we don't see it, and maybe he ultimately ends up being a guard for all we know, but if he doesn't work out at tackle, you may go into the offseason next year saying we need 2 tackles. It's hard to jump the gun that early, even if he doesn't start very often or at all in his rookie season. You don't want to say, well, we need a tackle because he's not good enough. He might not have been good enough in year 1, but that doesn't mean he won't be good enough in year 2 and then moving forward. Kind of look at Sam Cosmi, for instance. Even though he's made a full, switch to guard, I don't think we ever said he wasn't good enough, but we didn't think he was going to be a high-level starter at tackle at any point. He switches to guard, and now we feel like we've got one of the best guards in all of football. So you just don't know when that light bulb is going to come on and where at either. So whatever the case may be, Coleman's going to be an integral part of what's going on if he's able to wrestle away one of the starting tackle positions. We'll talk about him a little bit later on in the show. Also, Michael Dieter getting some first-team reps at left guard. Meanwhile, Nick Allegretti was working with the second team as a center. So I don't want to make too much of this particular development because head coach Dan Quinn talked about the importance of guys being able to play multiple positions on the offensive line. We'll talk more about that when we get to his presser. But I think this is a prime example of what DQ was talking about when wanting to make sure that guys can do multiple things along the offensive line and not just be kind of put in a box right away. He said eventually you put guys in a box and they play one position. But for the time being, for right now, this is the time where you want to see guys be able to move around and play multiple positions and see what they can do. So I think that's what they're kind of doing right now. JD5 started during red zone and 2-point conversion plays. He started for a large chunk of the plays today. So unlike past practices where Marcus Mariota took the first team reps, 11 on 11, 7 on 7, et cetera, JD5 was pretty much out there almost exclusively with the first team in today's practice. And I think you're going to start to see a little bit more of him with the first team. I think there was something really interesting that Zach Ertz talked about that we'll talk about when we get to Ertz's press conference that I think lends itself to him getting more and more reps with the ones. I think that's going to become very important as camp presses on. Although they told us that there is a process and they're going to adhere to that process in terms of getting him ready to become QB1. He did throw a couple of touchdown passes during red zone period. One to Olamide Zaccheaus that he kind of fit into a tight window. The other to Austin Eckler, who was wide open down in the red zone. Frankie Louvu was flying around on the first day of padded practices. That's not a surprise. He's a guy that is full of energy, going to be flying around. I want to give a quick shout out too, while I'm talking about guys flying around at practice. I'm going to give a quick shout out to at Brandon Burgundy, Burgundy and Gold on Twitter. At Brandon Burgundy sent me a bunch of clips of practice today. He was at practice, one of the many fans in attendance, and he had a bunch of clips, 12 to 18-second clips or so, just a play that he would record, and then he sent them to me. And so I was able to look at the plays and kind of see what was going on, watching individuals. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate if you're at practice and you have observations, even if you don't have video footage, that's fine. You don't have to send that to me. But if you're out there at practice, I want to hear from you. Like, what was very enlightening last year was a lot of you were out there and you immediately said, this fourth round pick, he can't play, right? He's not big enough. And these were things that we knew when he was drafted. I was not happy with the fourth round selection last year of the offensive lineman out of Utah. And he's strict. I was listening to John Keim from today, and he said that what is the name of that damn offensive lineman from Utah? I'm gonna look him up real quick because he's so insignificant to me right now that I can't even remember his name, to be honest with you. And I don't think he's gonna make the team. He wouldn't have made it last year, and they're strictly working him inside. Braden Daniels, thank you, Door Gunner. He's strictly being worked inside as a guard now, so they've given up on him as a tackle. I don't blame them. I wasn't impressed. I told you I thought it was a bad pick. He wasn't going to make the team. Last year's draft, honestly, was a shit show. It really, truly was. I don't know what's going to happen with the third round pick center or interior offensive lineman out of Arkansas. Braden Daniels looks like a wash at this point as a fourth round pick. Quan Martin may be the savior of that draft. We're still, the returns on investment on Emmanuel Forbes are still pending. So that's really what's going to ultimately determine how bad of a draft it is. Can they salvage last year's draft? Does Forbes turn out to be good? And what Quan Martin ultimately turns out to be. We like Martin right now. We got question marks on Forbes, and the rest of the draft pretty much looks like a shit show at this point. And we're only 1 year in. And I don't like to be that guy because I really think you can't judge a draft until you get about 3 years in. But it already doesn't look very good. It doesn't look very promising. And we'll see what happens with Chris Rodriguez Jr. And some of the guys that we got later on in the draft, the edge rusher from Clemson and things of that nature. But I'm just telling you right now, it doesn't look good. The returns do not look that promising. But a lot of you told me last year, immediately upon going out to practice, Braden Daniels can't cut it. He's not big enough. He's getting pushed around. He doesn't look the part of an NFL offensive lineman. And that came to fruition. So I trust a lot of your analysis. If you're out there and you see it with your own two eyes, please, by all means, I want to hear from you. And, my guy Brandon took the extra step of sending me video clips. And I appreciate any and every clip that's sent to me as well. So I just wanted to make that abundantly clear that if you're out at practice and you see something, please share it. I want to hear it. I want to know what you guys are seeing out there and how you're feeling. Like Brandon said, the D-line dominated today. I'm not surprised by that development. They're playing around with the offensive line. They're moving guys around. I expect the defensive line to be ahead of the offensive line. They're out there playing much faster, much quicker. They're not shuffling around pieces. They know who the starting defensive linemen are. They got their starters out there. They're not playing around with, well, I wonder if this guy is going to be good here. No. If Jamin Davis is trying to figure it out as an edge rusher, he's playing with the third string. He's not out there with the starters. Whereas with the offensive line, they're trying out Brandon Coleman here. They're trying out Michael Dieter here. They're moving around parts and pieces and shuffling things around to kind of figure out what's what. So I expect the defensive line to look sharper. And in the clips that Brandon sent me, I would concur, right? There was a play where Dante Fowler Jr. jumped into the backfield, knifed into the backfield, and had a chance at Austin Ekeler for probably like a 3-4 yard tackle for loss. He didn't get him down on the ground, so he missed that opportunity. But it was good to see that quickness and explosiveness from Dante Fowler Jr. And also, you want to see guys like Brandon Coleman be able to make that block, at least get enough of him, because I can't tell you for sure if that was Coleman's responsibility to block him, or was he supposed to just get a piece, allow the guard to then get on him and then get to the second level? That's what it looked like. It didn't look like Coleman did a good enough job of getting a piece of Dante Fowler Jr. to allow that guard to get up to him and block him. And so Coleman or Fowler almost made a big play there. But I did see a nice pass protection by Coleman on a drop back by Jaden Daniels, where he had Dorrance Armstrong Jr. in front of him rushing. He was able to wash him around the pocket and keep the integrity of the pocket intact. Jaden Daniels ultimately had to break the pocket, get out, and he scrambled because there was a little bit of pressure on the interior from the defensive tackles, but he got out of there obviously and ran with about maybe a 4 or 5 yard gain, scampered out of bounds. So it was good to see Coleman one-on-one in that situation. And first play of practice, Coleman had a block on Cleveland Farrell, then got up to the second level, sealed off the linebacker, and that led to a Brian Robinson Jr. touchdown run. So by all accounts, Coleman was really sharp today at left tackle. And again, that's a conversation that we are going to have a little bit later on today's show. The kickoff return players today. So guys that were back fielding kickoffs on kick return. I want to mention these names because head coach Dan Quinn talked today again about kickoff return and how they're not as comfortable with kick return quite yet like they are with punt return, because again, the rules for punt return really haven't been altered. So they're really comfortable with how that's going. I think they kind of got an idea of who they want to put back there to field punch, things of that nature. Not so crystal clear on kickoff. And it's kind of evident by the amount of names I'm about to give you on guys back there fielding kickoffs. So players fielding kickoffs today for the Commanders. Austin Ekeler, Damiere Byrd, Mike Sainristil, Olamide Zaccheaus, Davion Davis, Dax Milne, Kaz Allen, Jahan Dotson, JC Ice, a.k.a. Jamison Crowder, and, of course, Emmanuel Forbes still back there as well. It's starting to feel like more and more that this is Austin Eckler's job to lose back there. And I use the phrase to lose very loosely because I mean, you don't really know what they're going to ultimately do. But a lot of these guys that I just named, they aren't guaranteed roster spots. Most of them won't be on this team. I mean, you think about Damiere Byrd and Olamide Zaccheaus and Davion Davis and Dax Milne and Kaz Allen and Jamison Crowder. You think about that group right there, all of them being receivers. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 receivers. Of that group of 6, maybe 1, possibly 2 of them at most, but more likely than not, only 1 of them, if any, are going to make the team. So again, it feels more like an Eckler thing than anything else. But again, a guy like Kaz Allen, If he's going to make the team, he's going to have to make an indelible mark on specials as a return man if he is to stick on this roster. A guy like Jamison Crowder may be able to make this roster off of his ability not only to play special teams, but also his ability to play the receiver position. He may be able. Kaz Allen isn't going to wow you with the way he plays receiver. He doesn't have that advantage. He's going to have to go above and beyond on special teams to make this roster. A guy like Olamide Zaccheaus may have a leg up in terms of, much like Jamison Crowder, he can offer you the ability to play wide receiver, and they feel comfortable that in a pinch, if he has to go in there, he can get the job done, whereas that's not the case for Kaz Allen. So Davion Davis, I think, is going to struggle in that department. Dax Milne, same deal. And with Dax, I don't think he offers you much on special teams. He's going to have to make his way via being a receiver and maybe going down and making some tackles on special teams. And again, I just don't know how adept he is at that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the kickoff situation plays itself out. Really, I'm going to be honest with you. Right now, I'm a bit nervous about our special teams unit all the way around because we don't really know what we're getting out of our punt return unit right now. We have no clue what we're doing on kickoff right now. Everything's brand new. And honestly, we're not alone there. The entire league is still trying to figure out this whole kickoff return thing. So we're not alone there, but we have no clue right now. We don't have a guy designated to do that. And even when we finally put somebody back there, how effective are they going to be? Don't know, right? And then our field goal kicking situation bothers me right now. I am very annoyed with the situation that we find ourselves in because we shouldn't be here with the place kicking situation. Brandon McMahon has put us in a really tough spot by being a pervert, essentially. And so this is a really, really frustrating situation to be in because we've had kicking issues for the last 3-4 years, we'll call it. And I was really hoping that for 1 year, we didn't know how long. McManus only signed a 1-year deal, but for 1 year, I was just hoping to maybe put it to bed. Now here we are again. And that's not to say that we won't find a guy and actually put it to bed. But right now, that doesn't even seem like something. And again, if this team is going to overachieve, a lot of you want to put 9, 10, 11 wins. You want to talk crazy. You better have a airtight special teams unit. We can't go out there and just wing it on special teams, be missing kicks, extra points and shit, and expect to win games. We're not good enough to do that, right? So if you're looking for this team to overachieve, they better figure it out on special teams, right? And it's a long, long way to go between now and week 1 at Tampa, but a lot of things have to be kind of figured out, right? So including, who's going to return kicks on kickoffs. So a lot of things to kind of iron out. So that was training camp practice day number 5 in a nutshell. A lot of emphasis put on the run game, a lot of emphasis put on red zone, a lot of emphasis put on 2-point conversion, as we were told. A lot of emphasis being put on the trenches, proper angles, proper leverage, hand placements, combo blocks, things of that nature. Really wanting to see, and we're going to talk more about that as Dan Quinn mentioned this in his presser, really wanting to see where the offensive and defensive lines in particular were really at with the first day of pads. So let's get to the pressers. Again, 2 veteran players spoke today. And then, of course, head coach Dan Quinn addressed the media prior to practice. The 2 players spoke after practice. So it's always nice to hear from, the veterans like Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner. We'll start with Zach Ertz. And Ertz kind of echoed some of the things that I was saying yesterday. I talked about practice with the pads being, real football, right? The first real sign of football. And 2 of his quotes during his first response to a question, he said, "The real football begins now." And then he said, "The grass basketball is over now." So head coach Dan Quinn talked about, the emphasis being put on the skill guys during the offseason, OTAs and minis, and then the early stages of training camp. With no pads on, you're still kind of really focusing in on the skill guys. You're trying to implement a little bit more of the run game and kind of get that going, as he talked about from a skill standpoint and getting the mechanics down and getting all of the fundamentals down. But the physicality is where it's at, and playing with the proper pad level and taking the proper angles and the hand placement and all of that stuff. Working on combo blocks, all of that good stuff. You get to kind of see that when the pads go on. Ertz talked about, sort of the, the tight ends are an extension of the offensive line. So, pads going on is important for the offensive line, the defensive line, but not just those guys. The running backs, it gets really real for them now because now they're actually hitting these holes with aggression and they can be hit now. Tight ends, they're blocking a lot in the run game. And so there's physicality there on their end. So, like he said, this is as close as you're going to get to real football until you get to the preseason games and, the joint practices and so forth and so forth. He talked about the guys in the tight end room have to carve out a role on special teams. I thought that was interesting because you don't really think about it from that perspective. And then, to hear a veteran who doesn't have to play special teams in Zach Ertz, a guy that's in year 12, he's not going to be playing a ton of special teams, but that's a pretty young tight end room that he's a part of, right? Bates is the next oldest guy. And if I'm not mistaken, Bates is going into year 4, right? I think this is year 4 of John Bates. So everybody else, pretty young, right? This is year 3 of Cole Turner. This is year 3 of Amani Rogers. This is year 1 for Colson Yankoff. So it's a young room when you think about it. And to his point, like, y'all better be able to play special teams if you're trying to make this roster. Ben Sinnott is a rookie, obviously, but he's going to make this team. But, if you're trying to carve out a niche for yourself, you better be ready to contribute on special teams. So he talked about that as well. He talked about communication with Jaden Daniels. And this is the part of his presser that I thought was probably the most interesting to me. And he said, that he, finds himself talking to Jaden, after their reps together, but they've been so few and far between that they have to make the most of their reps. And it got me to thinking, he's like, yeah, he hasn't had a lot of reps with the ones a lot of times, so, and the reps that they do share, he wants to really pick his brain, kind of figure out what it is he's looking at. He's like, it doesn't really matter how I view things. It's how he views them, because that's ultimately what's going to help him matures what he sees, and then me adapting to what makes him comfortable. And so he's like, I'm listening to him talking, and the thing that I keyed in on was they just haven't had a lot of reps together, and that has to change, right? Obviously, there's a process that they talked about they want to go through with Jaden, and they want to continue to, ease him into, and there's no rush, but also if you want that continuity, if you want him to have the kind of chemistry with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and Zach Ertz and a number of these guys that are starters, you got to give him starters reps, right? You got to start getting him out there with the ones and letting him make mistakes, let him succeed. Whatever happens, there's something that you can learn and take from it. And there's a dialogue that happens when you're out there with these guys. You start working on timing. You start figuring out how guys come out of their breaks, and you can discuss that. Hey, this is where I want you coming out of your break so I can put the ball here. And, there was a route that I saw Ertz run today that Brandon sent me a clip of, where Ertz ran a deep a deep hook over the middle of the field. Bobby Wagner was sinking into deep zone coverage, and he hooked up right in front of him, probably about 12 to 15 yards over the middle of the field. And Jaden was on target. He was on time. As soon as Ertz came out of his break and turned his head around, that ball was on him, and he caught it and went up the field. So that was good to see. You want more of that, right? More reps with the ones, more opportunities, for them to get reps together so that they can start to communicate and talk about what's comfortable for Jaden. Here's how I see it. When they do this, this is what I'm going to do. And this is what you like, again, because Ertz is a veteran and he talked about that. As a matter of fact, John Keim asked both veteran players, Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, kind of what's the difference between your younger self and your veteran self now, right? Like, what's the biggest difference you see in what you've kind of seen through your career, what you're better at, things of that nature. Nobody's going to talk about what they're worse at. No one's going to talk about, I've gotten slower, this, that, and the third. But, both of them talked about being wiser in different ways. For Ertz, he talked about there isn't a coverage I haven't seen in my career. So I'm able to play a lot faster because I know exactly what they're doing. I know exactly what I need to do to get open. So I'm almost 2 steps ahead of where I would have been when I was younger, where it took me a lot longer to figure out what the defense was doing. And so, I'd have to adjust kind of on the fly. He's like, now I can be proactive instead of reactive because I know what they're doing. So, with that being said, he's an asset to a guy like Jaden Daniels, who's a rookie, who's seeing a lot of this for the first time at the NFL level. So I think it is imperative that they just get more reps together. So, and that's going to happen over the course of the summer, right? That's going to happen as they get more and more comfortable and closer to naming him QB1. You're going to see him shift from, Marcus Mariota took a half or a third of the reps to Jaden Daniels took all of the reps with the ones, or the vast majority of them. We're going to get to that point here shortly, but you just want to make sure that you give him as many reps as you can, him being Jaden Daniels, so they can get more and more comfortable with the likes of a Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz, throwing to Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler and Jahan Dotson and things of that nature. You want him to get as comfortable. Like, it's cool for him to be throwing the ball to Davion Davis. Davion Davis isn't going to be here. Like, let's be frank. Let's be honest with one another. That's cool to tell me that he threw a touchdown pass to Davion Davis in the back of the end zone. That's cool, but Davion Davis isn't going to be here. So I don't care about him throwing a touchdown pass to Davion Davis. I might love the process that he went through to get Davion Davis the football, but ultimately, I need him throwing to the guys that are going to be here, that he'll be throwing to on Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, or Thursdays, and some Saturdays, right? So, on Cliff Kingsbury, he talked about, Cliff being a major reason why he's here. He said, I've seen more joy from Cliff this camp than ever before. I've never seen him, this energetic, this vibrant, full of life, full of energy. Like, Cliff meant it when he said that I don't want to be a coach. I just want to coach offense. Like, you could tell he was stressed by being a head coach. A lot came with that. And not that he didn't know what being a head coach entailed. He did it for, a number of years at Texas Tech. But there's a different level to this, especially at the NFL level. And, it was taxing. It was draining. He just wants to coach offense. He just wants to be around quarterbacks. He got to do that at USC last year. I think that helped rejuvenate him. And now, Ertz is like, man, he's having a blast. He being Cliff Kingsbury, coming out to practice every day, working with Jaden, working with Marcus, working with, Jeff and Sam and all those guys, and really implementing the offense and kind of getting his feet wet with this new group of quarterbacks, especially Jaden in particular. Cliff takes this challenge on of getting the most out of Jaden Daniels, and he's definitely re-energized and reinvigorated. And so Zach talked about that, and he said, hell, I'm reinvigorated. I feel energized. Because really, I don't know if you guys understand or know this, Zach Ertz really didn't play a lot of football last year. He was with Arizona early in the season, ended up getting, cut at one point, tried to latch on with the Detroit Lions when they were making their run towards the Super Bowl, but he got there so late, he never really got integrated into their offense. So he really didn't play a ton of football. We saw Ertz early on in Arizona, and somebody brought it up, and I very, very vividly remember he dropped some balls, some catchable balls. I thought he had a touchdown that he could have caught early from Josh Dobbs. We dodged a couple of bullets, but he talked about being reinvigorated and how he's having a ton of fun. And I think he's also at that point of his career where he understands the end is near. So I'm going to enjoy every single day that I'm out there with the fellas and getting to play the game that I love, because soon I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. Right. So I think he's at that point now where he's having fun too, because he understands, you know, I'm on borrowed time almost. And we'll see. He could be playing for another 3-4 years. We'll see just how well he plays this year. You know, you always think about guys as they get to this age, but, you know, tight end is one of those positions that if you're good at what you do, Mercedes Lewis is like 40 years old and he's playing tight end yet again. I think he's with the Bears this year. He played the last 4 or 5 years with the Packers. He's been in the league for like 16 years, it feels like. And he's still going strong because he can block and he's carved out a niche for himself. Tight end is one of those positions that if you want to play for a long time and you keep yourself in shape, you serve a purpose. You can play for a long time. So Ertz may not be done, but he talked about Cliff Kingsbury and the offense, because obviously, you know, he's one of the few guys that has experience in Cliff Kingsbury's system. And he said, you know, there are a lot of similarities, but, you know, also he's tailoring the offense to some of the skill sets of certain guys that are here, you know, primarily Jaden. And so, you know, a lot of the concepts are the same. And Ertz is like, look, it really doesn't matter where you go or, you know, what offense you're in. It doesn't really deviate that far. You know, guys are running a lot of the same concepts. They call it different things and they may have different ways of getting to it, but it's all of it is usually somewhat similar. So he talked about that. And he also talked about the energy of the fans, which he had a unique perspective, having played in this division for a number of years with the Philadelphia Eagles. He kind of gets it about what this, you know, fan base has endured. He talked about the energy from having a new front office, a new coaching staff, and he even went as far as to say a new quarterback that will be starting. He said no matter who started, whether it's Marcus, we all know who the hell's starting at this point, but, you know, Marcus or Jaden, doesn't matter. That's a new starting quarterback, no matter which one of those guys it is. None of the quarterbacks on the roster were here last year, so it doesn't matter who starts. They're all brand new. So he's like, anytime you have a brand new quarterback starting, especially if he's the number 2 overall pick, you got a new coaching staff, you know, new front office. It's all brand new. You're going to have new energy. We want to take advantage of that, but we don't want to just have an offseason full of energy. We also want to have us take advantage of all of this newness, all of this energy from the fans. And we want to kind of parlay that into consistency and have these fans, you know, coming back and you know, being a part of us turning this thing around essentially. So thought he talked about that as well. So that was Zach Ertz in a nutshell. We heard from Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner has quickly become a player favorite. Like every player that he's encountered seems to have some kind of glowing review of Bobby Wagner's leadership and what he means to this team. It's not a surprise that he's here and the impact that he's had already. I told you one of the things that it's very apparent that we lacked with the last regime was veteran leadership. You know, we went so far to the young end of the spectrum that they forgot to fill in the gaps with veterans that could show the young guys how to do it. And so having a Zach Ertz, a Austin Eckler, a Bobby Wagner here, you can see that it's paying off huge dividends already. So on that note, he talked about leadership, you know, and he said the same thing he said, you know, in a previous presser about leadership, how he kind of got a lot of, you know, leadership qualities from some of the guys that came before him that he really took a lot of notes from, and they poured into him, like Ray Lewis and London Fletcher were a couple of names that he mentioned that poured into him as a younger player. He said, you know, watching those guys acquire battle scars and then them sharing the information with me, I now have a ton of battle scars that I didn't have as a younger player, and I can share my wealth of knowledge with, you know, these younger players. If they are thirsty for the information, I don't mind sharing that information with them. So, you know, he's talked about being a leader on this team. You know, the question that I talked about earlier that John Keim asked both he and Zach Ertz about, you know, where do you see your veteran self versus your younger self? And what do you think you do better now or worse now than you did before? Again, excuse me, nobody's going to talk about what they're doing worse, right? I'm not going to bring that up. I'm not going to talk about that, right? Obviously, Wagner's not as twitchy as he once was, but what he lacks in that explosiveness and the ability to see it and go get it that he once had, he makes up for it with the ability to just understand and diagnose very quickly what's going on in front of him, which allows him to react very fast. So it doesn't feel like that step is lost as much, right? And he talked about how important film study is. He's like, my ability to intake film, understand what's going on, allows me to play so much faster, than I once did in terms of seeing it and reacting. And he said also what that does is it allows not only me to play faster, but for the others around me to play faster. If I know what's going on, I can relay that to the rest of my teammates around me so they can play fast too. If I know it's a screen to the left and I'm yelling screen, 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 left, 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 they know screen to the left, they can get to the football just as fast as I can. So he's like, not only benefits me when, I watch film and I can see what's going on, but it affects and impacts the guys around me because they can play faster as well. He talked about the first day of pads and the significance that goes into it. And, the thing that has been brought up a number of times that I don't think I really gave too much thought to it until I heard it mentioned like 4 or 5 times over the last day or two, is just a lot of these guys haven't had on pads since the last game they played in last season. For us, that's last January. You're talking 6-7 months ago. What were we in July, end of July? You're talking 6 months that these guys haven't had pads on, haven't had real contact. So that's a long time. Just so we're clear, that's a long time that, there's no other sport where you go that long without, practicing the sport in that way. Like basketball, guys are playing basketball year round. When the season's over, they're playing pickup games. Pickup games aren't that far away from playing in an NBA game because they're playing against other NBA players when they play in these pickup games, right? You see guys in the Drew League and things of that nature getting good runs in. Like, you're still playing ball, right? Baseball players, they're still playing baseball, right? A lot of these guys go over to world leagues, they're playing over there, and they're in spring train, like they're playing baseball. They're not going 6 months without playing their sport, right? Football players go a full 6 months essentially without putting pads on. Like, that's significant. So he's like, there's a significant amount of rust that you have to knock off. And so, the first day of pads is kind of symbolic of, all right, real football is back. Now we got to knock off the rust and get back to playing the real version of football. Getting out here, running around, t-shirts and shorts and helmets is cool, but this is real football right here. So he talked about that as well. Pace of play and communication. He talked about those two things being very impressive for the first day of pads. He was very impressed with their pace of play, which, again, that's a staple and a hallmark of Dan Quinn's defense, now Joe Witt Jr.'s defense. They're going to play fast. Like, that's the one thing that I think you're going to recognize from a fan perspective right away is they play fast defensively. So he's like very impressed with our pace of play. And he said he's very impressed with their level of communication. That's something that Quinn had really been preaching. He said he wasn't really thrilled with the level of communication the first half of the first day of practice at training camp. But he said by the end of that first practice, it went from a C in terms of communication to about a B. So the communication is starting to ramp up. Guys are talking. And Bobby Wagner seems to feel really good about where they are from a communication standpoint as well. I talked about this a couple of times listening to Bobby Wagner, and I talked about the domino effect of why guys are here, why Cliff Kingsbury is here, why Brian Robinson or Brian Johnson is here, and, why a guy like Bobby Wagner is here. Zach Ertz, clearly he's here because Cliff Kingsbury is here. You don't get Cliff, you probably don't have Zach Ertz right now. You think that having head coach Dan Quinn here is the reason Bobby Wagner is here. I take it a step further. I think he is here because of Dan Quinn, but indirectly, it's Quinn being here, which then lured Ken Norton Jr. here, which then I think was the piece that got Bobby Wagner here. And Wagner lights up every time he talks about linebacker coach Ken Norton Jr. And he talked about his impact and his presence in that linebacker room. And we've heard other guys talk about the impact and the presence of Ken Norton Jr. And we heard Frankie Louvu just last week talk about, he calls him 7-Eleven because he's always full of energy. He's always keeping the dialogue going. He's always keeping that room full of life. And, Ken Norton Jr. Is one of those coaches that seems to be infectious with his energy, and the players love him. And Bobby loves Ken Norton Jr. He's like, yo, part of the biggest reason I'm here is Ken Norton Jr. He literally said that today. And he's like, we're in the film room, and, he's cracking jokes about me as a younger player, how I remember my younger self and how he remembers me as a younger player. There's discrepancies there. So we're going back and forth. And he's like, it's always really cool when there's a coach that knows you as well as he does. So there's that back and forth between those two. And you really start to see Bobby Wagner's wall sort of come down. Not that he was standoffish or anything like that, but you can tell that that's a guy that definitely kind of gets Bobby Wagner, and there's a really strong relationship there between him and Ken Norton Jr. So that's a big, big hire for, again, I can't tell you how big this staff is and why this staff has a chance to really change the culture here in Washington. And Bobby Wagner talking about Ken Norton Jr. is another example of that. He talked about the team identity and the linebackers kind of being the table setters, if you will. So he talked about establishing an identity and why that's important. He's like, once you set the identity, because when you set the identity of a team, you're essentially establishing, who you are. This is, what we represent. These are the standards. And he's like, once the standards are set, you have to live up to those standards or else. So he's like, it is important. It is imperative to set a team identity. They're in a process of doing that right now. And then, once you've set that, now you got to live up to that every single day, right? And look to exceed that if at all possible. And he talked about the linebackers being a huge part of that, because he's like, we're in the middle of the defense. We call the defense. We set the table. We get everybody lined up. We watch the most film, and we don't know if that's true or not, but, he feels like, to be, the best. And I've heard this from all the linebackers, Luke Kuechly and Ray Lewis and all those guys that are special. They talk about the film study because that's what allows them to call out. How many times have we heard somebody saying in their press conference, Bobby Wagner called out what we were doing before we did it? I've heard Jaden Daniels say that at least 2 or 3 times. And if that's the case, it's because he's watching film. He understands when they line up with this split, right? When they go to this formation and their receivers are lined up with this split, this is what they're trying to get to. This is what they're looking to do, right? So if you're watching that amount of tape, it allows you to play faster and get everybody else lined up, as he mentioned earlier. And he feels like the linebackers are the heartbeat of the defense. And so, he's tried to convey that to the rest of the linebackers in that room. And then he talked about Jaden Daniels. He said that Jaden has exhibited confidence. That's the thing that he's been most impressed with Jaden Daniels to this point, is how confident of a football player he has been as a young guy. You don't see that level of confidence from young players very often, but Jaden Daniels has been very confident, and he feels really good about the progress that he's seen from him as he continues to grow and adapt to being a starting quarterback in the NFL. So that was Bobby Wagner in a nutshell. Head coach Dan Quinn's presser. He talked about the penalties. Remember, he mentioned them yesterday, the two types, post-snap, pre-snap and post-snap, and then the combative penalties. He didn't talk as much about combatives. He kind of focused more in on the pre and post-snap penalties and said, we got to eliminate those. But he said, you expect the expected. You expect to have penalty issues early in camp, and then you have to set the standard on what it is we expect out of you from a penalty standpoint and how we're going to avoid these mistakes. So, he said, we're working on that. And then by the time we get to the end of this process, we should be a finished product, and we should be a team that's more disciplined and not having those self-inflicted wounds. DQ also talked about, what to expect from practice and the things that they're going to focus in on. He talked about pad level, leverage, the run game, pass pro, combo blocks. He said those are the things that we're going to be really putting a ton of emphasis on. So that's what we're going to expect to hear about over the next few days as they really get settled in with the pads. The O-line movement. He talked about guys being able to play multiple positions. And I kind of pointed this out when I talked about Michael Dieter getting reps with the first team offense at left guard. Meanwhile, Nick Allegretti, bumping back to center on the second team to get reps at center, because you're not taking Tyler Biadasz off of the first team offensive line. Because again, you want to start getting those guys really comfortable in doing the things that they're going to be doing. Sam Cosmi is your starting right guard. Tyler Biadasz is your starting center. We know those to be facts on the offensive line. Nothing else is really etched in stone, right tackle, or left guard. So you can play around with those positions all you like to kind of figure out who's going to be the best combination, but you're building that combination around center and right guard because those two guys are etched in stone, essentially. So the movement on the offensive line, he said, look, these tackles, we want them to be able to play both tackle positions. So do they have a swing tackle element to their game? So again, we've seen Cornelius Lucas. We know he can play both left and right. They've put him at both left and right. They've put Brandon Coleman at both left and right. He's been at left here kind of exclusively the last 3 practices in particular, but they did have him at right tackle like 3 practices ago or so when he got right tackle reps, and Cornelius Lucas got left tackle reps. Same with Trent Scott. So they're moving guys around, kind of trying to assess what guys can and can't do. Same thing with the interior offensive linemen. You pretty much need to be able to play all 3 interior spots. If you're a guard, you should be able to play some center. If you're a center, you need to be able to play some guard. So that's kind of what you're seeing with some of the O-line movement to this point. He talked about comfort level with special teams and the return game in particular. And he's like, I'm pretty comfortable with the return game in terms of punts. Not as comfortable with where we are from a kickoff return. But again, it's early, and they're still trying to figure out who's going to be back there. And, he brought up something like he opened my mind, and this is why I love these pressers. He talked about something that was really interesting with the kickoff situation. He said, what's also not as defined yet is these alternative kickoff situations, right? These alternate situations that could crop up in a game. Like we're working on the basics, regular kickoffs, in the kickoff, the landing zone, all that good stuff. But he's like, what happens if the wind's blowing and the ball isn't on the tee? Remember, there's nobody back there with the kicker but the kicker. So if that happens, you got to get one of the guys all the way up there that's at the 35-yard line or so. He's got to come all the way back. You lose a guy because somebody's got to hold the football for the kicker, right? Remember, normally if the ball is blowing off the tee, it's a windy day, you just take one of the guys that's standing next to the, where the kicker's going to kick the ball, and he just holds his finger, and then he gets up and he runs down with the rest of his teammates. A little bit different when all of your teammates are 40 yards down the field. You're down here holding the ball. Now you got to you're down a man essentially. Now it might help you if it breaks and you got an extra defender back there with the kicker, but it's just crazy, right? Can that guy move? Remember, only the kicker can move. Once the ball's kicked off, nobody else can move until the ball's caught. Well, the guy that's holding the ball with one finger, can he then move too, right? With the kicker, right? So there's a lot of things that I didn't even think about, right? He also talked about penalties on kickoffs. Then you change where the kickoff is from. And so do the guys that are at the 35 now move back the amount of penalty yardage or move up Like, again, something to think about. And then he also talked about after a safety, that's a free kick. How's that going to look? So total mind blow. These are things I didn't even think about that you have to entertain now. I just total mind blow, right? So he brought those things up. He talked about physicality level and rules of engagement for padded practices. Like, he went back to the sparring analogy that, we're not out here to hurt each other, but you do want to go hard enough that you're getting the proper work in. So he talked about that, talked about, taking care of one another, but, again, doing the things that are necessary to put your guys in a position to get the work that is necessary to get the results that you're looking for. He talked about with the pads on, there's a shift from the skill guys to the trenches and physicality, and you can kind of figure that out on your own. That doesn't really need a lot of explanation. All off-season OTAs, all mini camps, early stages of training camp, you're focusing on the skill guys, the tight ends, running backs, receivers, DBs, linebackers, 7-on-7, a lot of 7-on-7 drills, quarterback, not too much of an emphasis on the run game and the physicality in the trenches with the D-line and the O-line. Now it shifts from, guys running around, making plays in the secondary, throwing it to the backside of the backfield, one-on-ones with linebackers and running backs to, all right, now we getting down and dirty in the trenches. Physicality, run game, fits, things of that nature. So that makes sense, right? He talked about Johnny Newton and his progress. He's not yet ready for 11-on-11. There are no limitations, he said, and if they wanted to put him out there, they could. But they said that this is a process with him. They don't have to rush. And just keep in mind, from this standpoint, they're ahead of schedule with Johnny Newton. They didn't expect him to be back yet. None of us did. So the fact that he came back on the first day of training camp, they've got a bit of a runway, which is what DQ said when he first came back. We got a runway now. We don't have to rush him. We can take our time, and eventually we're going to work him back into team drills. And one of the clips that Brandon sent me from practice, I saw, Johnny Newton on the other field, doing, individual work. You could tell he wants to get out there. He's chomping at the bit, but they're going to take their time with him because there's no rush. Like Adam Peters said, we're not playing games anytime soon. So we don't have to rush this process. I thought this was really interesting. Probably the most interesting nugget from DQ today. He talked about the cornerback position and the three guys in particular, but he talked about the position as a whole because obviously there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of different variables with that secondary, specifically the cornerback position. But he talked about three guys in particular: Emmanuel Forbes, Benjamin St-Juste, and Michael Davis. These three guys in particular are going to be the guys that are really getting the bulk of the reps at corner. When you're talking boundary corner, they feel really good about Mike Sainristil inside as a nickel. But these three guys are going to be really the heavy rotators at the two cornerback spots. And he talked about, one day it could be Juice and Davis, and it could be Forbes and Davis. They're going to continue to play around with those combinations to kind of figure out, who's what and who they feel most comfortable being out there. I'm telling you, Michael Davis, when it's all said and done, I expect him to be starting at corner, whether it's opposite of Forbes or opposite of St-Juste. And again, much like Joe Witt Jr. said, hey, don't talk to me about starters. We rolling up 17, 18 deep, and we whooping people. We whooping folks. I think you're going to need all three of those dudes in conjunction with Mike Sainristil anyway. So when it's all said and done, you want more, not less. I feel good about those three. Well, two out of the three guys, I feel good about their abilities. Forbes is still a question mark. But when it's all said and done, if all three of those guys are playing well, we're in pretty good shape. Couple them with Sainristil, we're in really good shape. And really, we need one more guy to step up. These three, Sainristil, and then one more guy, because you need five. You need five guys that you feel good about. God forbid something happened, and now you got to tap into that depth. You got to feel good about the guys. Last year, we were in trouble. When somebody went down, you knew, oh, man, now somebody's in the game. Like, Christian Holmes, where you're like, man, we in some trouble, right? Like we had no depth. You had no ability for somebody to go down. because you didn't really have any depth. Well, you're hoping that we can eventually get to a place where our depth isn't as bad and you're not as thin when the guy goes down, but we'll see what happens. He talked about how many quarterbacks will be kept this offseason or this season. I don't really anticipate them keeping, 3 quarterbacks, but he's like, the rules have changed and we'll see what they ultimately decide to do. They don't know what they're going to do. He even said, with Adam Peters, that might be more of a question for him. But in any event, he talked about 2 versus 3 and that sort of thing. He talked about Jahan Dotson and how, Jahan's got a really good catch radius, really good hands. He's a really good route runner, and they got to get him the ball in space. And this is a big season for Jahan, man. Like, he's going to have to show this year. This is the year, right? When you talk about guys that really have to show improve, Forbes is up there. St. Juice is up there because it's the last year of his rookie contract. So guys like him and Defoe and guys like Jamin Davis, if they want to be here, they're going to have to show improve. But Jahan, it's a massive year for Jahan Dotson, because if you walk away from this season feeling like we felt last year, you got to do something. Whether that's Brandon Ayuk or you go out and you draft a guy, high-level guy next year, something has to be done. Like, Terry needs a compliment. You need a 1A or 1B to Terry's 1A, 1B, whatever. You need another guy. And if Jahan can't surface as that player, then we have to do something. This is a big year for him, right? And then on Brandon Coleman, DQ talked about one of the things he didn't really know about Coleman. He knew he was a tremendous athlete. He knew he was a guy that could move laterally, side to side. But he said, what I didn't realize is that this guy has tremendous balance. I could have told him that, like, what I would call one of Brandon Coleman's superpowers is that he was always on balance at TCU. You go back and you watch any of the, breakdowns that I did of Brandon Coleman, and one of the things I talk about is his balance, right? You rarely see him on the ground or out of position at TCU. He does a really good job of, when he fits his hands up on the pads, he stays engaged with guys. I saw that on the rep against Dorrance Armstrong today. And I saw another rep where he had against Cleveland Farrell. So you see him fitting up his hands, getting in a good position, staying engaged. So I wasn't shocked by that. DQ didn't really maybe see it on tape as much, but that was something that I saw, and I thought that was one of his strengths. So he talked about his balance being tremendous, and how a lot of times when guys get beat, it's usually because they're out of position, they have poor balance. That's usually not the case with Brandon Coleman. So he talked about him being a guy that is usually where he's supposed to be, when he's supposed to be there, and that gives him a decided advantage over a number of younger players when they get into the league trying to protect. So that was DQ and his presser for day 5 of training camp in a nutshell. So let's get to the comment section and talk about what you guys have to say. Got a super chat here from Coop. Thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you, Coop, who writes, "Hey, Lou, LTN special announcements coming soon." I actually already made one. I'm going to do another one tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But I already talked about the LTN exclusives once before last week, or maybe the week before that. I think it was Friday, the week before. But I'm going to do one tomorrow, so stay tuned for that for sure. If you have not already seen the one that I put out before. Christopher McLaughlin, my guy Chris, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for the support as always. Really, truly do appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. My guy Chris writes, "Hey Lou, what's up, Chris? Really appreciate the support as always, my man. Hope all is well with you and the fam. Likewise, Chris. 4 questions. 1, how many safeties do you expect to make the 53-man roster? 5. 2 and 3. What percentage of the O plays do you expect to be no huddle, and who is someone you expect to make the practice squad not the 53-man roster? And then 4, how many QBs make the 53-man roster? So I'm going to take these in reverse order, right? Because I think the ones towards the front end are a lot longer in terms of answers. So how many QBs do I think will make the 53-man roster? I think it's going to be 2. I would not be shocked if a third guy makes it, but I don't see anybody wrestling away Sam Hartman from us, after the preseason. If you cut a guy like Jeff Driscoll, which you will, and somebody snatches him up, so be it, right? You're not fighting over Jeff Driscoll. You're not also holding up a roster spot for a guy like Jeff Driscoll. Now, again, our roster is one that's such that you can keep 3 and it won't kill you, right? But if we feel like we have talented players at other positions and you need to trim off fat, the easiest place to go and do it is quarterback, because you're going to keep one of these 2 guys, if not both of them, on your practice squad at quarterback, right? So if anything happens to any quarterback, you'll just be able to pull up one of these guys from the practice squad, right? So I think they're going to keep 2, to be honest with you, because it gives you more roster flexibility and allows you to keep guys at other positions. You keep a third quarterback. Like, the only way you keep 3 quarterbacks, as we saw a few years ago, is if you have a young quarterback like Sam. We had Sam Howell, right? And he wasn't going to play, but they just drafted him. They weren't going to cut him and expose him to the rest of the league. You had Carson Wentz and you still had Taylor Heineke. That's when you keep 3. We don't have that position, right? You don't have to keep Sam Hartman. If somebody takes him, so be it. But I think he'll be fine. Nobody in the league drafted him for a reason. I don't see him being a flight risk, right? So I think that the number there is 2. What percentage of the offensive plays do I expect to be no huddle, and who is someone do I expect to make the practice squad, not the 53-man roster? Tyler Owens is a guy that I think is going to make the practice squad, not the 53-man roster. I think they want to develop this kid. I think they see a lot in him. He's big, he's physical, height, weight, speed, specimen. I think he's could end up being a really good special teams player. In the meantime, I expect him to be on the practice squad, not make, because we're so deep at safety, I can't see him making the squad at safety, but I can see him being on the practice squad. The percentage of plays that we run no huddle, we almost never ran no huddle in the last regime, whether it was Scott Turner or Eric Bieniemy, unless it was a 2-minute, situation. I think you're going to see no huddle during the course of the game in random times, which is a sight for sore eyes. I will say that maybe 30% of the time you'll see them go no huddle, up tempo, right? Which is a drastic change from essentially 0% other than end of half situations, right? Where we had to have it. So yeah, that's what I think. And then how many safeties do I expect to make the 53-man roster? That is a great question. That is, I think that and defensive tackle are 2 of the more interesting positions. We're so deep at safety, and you feel like the position's already spoken for, but there's just so many guys. So it's hard to say, ultimately what happens, because Jeremy Chin and Quan Martin are your 2 starters, right? Defoe is here. He's not going anywhere. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. Jeremy Reeves is a core special teamer, so you'd like to think he's not going anywhere. You still have Percy Butler, right? That's 5 guys. And then you start looking around at, other guys and, other safeties. You think the number is 5. That's how I envision it. But they also drafted Dominique Hampton. Are they going to cut him? I don't think they're cutting Dominique Hampton, right? They could. I mean, he's a 6th round pick. They could cut him, theoretically speaking. Or he's a 5th rounder, excuse me. Him and McGee are 5th rounders. They could cut him. I don't see that happening, though, right? I told you I expect every draft pick except for the 7th round pick, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, to make this football team. So if that's the case, that's a 6th safety you're talking about there. So it gets a little wild at the safety position. There may be a surprise cut there, right? Like a Percy Butler. I don't think any of us would be blown away if he gets cut. He seems to be the odd man out right now, because if it's a choice between Percy, a guy they didn't draft, and Dominique Hampton, a guy that they did draft, they're going to take their guy, right? Dominique Hampton. So in my mind's eye, safety is very interesting because you could see as many as 6 kept. I think the number is 5, and I think a guy like Percy Butler might be on the outside looking in. So it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of develops. David Brown, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB, and thank you for your generosity. Really, truly do appreciate you. David, who writes, happy belated, Louie. Thank you so much. I really, truly appreciate that, man. I really do. Appreciate the content. Thank you. I appreciate the support. He says, if BC ends up our starting left tackle, this draft class is going to be legendary. If he starts at left tackle, I think that's going to be the kind of the cherry on top of this draft class, because I think you can also already see that you're gonna get contributions from Jaden Daniels in his rookie season, Mike Sainristil, Ben Sinnott, and Johnny Newton, all rookies that we expect contributions for immediately. Luke McCaffrey, you throw him in that pile as well, right? And then Coleman is the one guy in the first 2 days that you're like, he could be a key contributor or he could be a very minimal contributor. McGee looks to have a big role, whether it be this year or next year or, whatever, but he looks to have a big role at some point. And Hampton, we'll see what he turns into. Same thing with, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, if anything. But of the guys that were drafted in the first 2 days, Coleman is the wild card, because if he starts, he could have the biggest impact outside of Jaden Daniels, right? Obviously, if he's playing left or right tackle and getting significant snaps, that's important. And I'm telling you right now, if he's starting, this draft class has already exceeded the importance of any draft class under Ron Rivera. Without a doubt. If Daniels is starting, if Sainristil is starting, and you got a true nickel, if Sinnott is out there getting real reps and he's doing work, and Johnny Newton is out there playing and having an impactful role, you've already exceeded any draft class that they've turned in. Hell, the 2020 class, which was supposed to be like the foundation of Ron Rivera's tenure, none of those guys are even really here anymore. Cam Curl's gone. Antonio Gibson's gone. Chase Young's gone. Like that, almost that entire draft class gone. Right? So again, when you look at what this draft class can be, Brandon Coleman is sort of a wild card in what he can provide us. Again, I don't want to rush him. I want him to be ready when that opportunity comes. But man, if he's starting, like you said, I've already said this, and I believe this wholeheartedly. This draft class will be the foundation and building block of what this group is trying to build in Washington. If Brandon Coleman hits, do you know what that unlocks for us next year in terms of the needs and how you can go about the draft next year? Like, if you have a left tackle, it changes everything. You still probably will need a right tackle, but you don't have to get one in the first round, right? You can then focus on, if Jahan's not living up to expectations, you can draft your receiver next year in the first round, or you can go in a different direction, right? Depending on what needs crop up for us and what we figure out, okay, this is what we saw that we needed looking at the roster last year, right? And looking at the season and how things went. This is what we determined that we needed the most. But if we don't have a starting left tackle, if like Coleman doesn't, pan out this year, or we didn't see enough from him, then that's got to be your priority, right, next year. So Coleman's a huge wild card. And I love the progress that I'm hearing he's making. John Keim seems to think that he's playing really well right now. He had a tremendous practice today. I talked about it already, where, with the pads on for the first time, he showed up and showed out. That's a great sign, and we'll start to see how the staff feels about him. They're going to keep moving these pieces around. So, you shouldn't be upset if you hear that, Cornelius Lucas is back in at left tackle, this, that, and the third, because they're going to keep shuffling these pieces around. But if you keep hearing that Coleman was at left tackle again and again and again with the ones, and this continues to be a theme, then they're starting to become satisfied with what they're seeing from him as well. So that's 3 days in a row. And this was the first day with pads on, and he was even more impressive with the pads on. We'll see if he earns another day tomorrow with the ones again at left tackle. And if that continues to be the case, look out, right? Look out. Christopher McLaughlin, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Double up. My guy, Chris, thank you so much for the support once again. Really appreciate you and David Brown with the massive support. Really can't thank you guys enough for the support. Who writes, hey, Lou, I wanted to follow up with you on a question I asked about Terry being the best wide receiver all time for the team. FYI, Terry, after 5 seasons, has 70 receptions and 1,000 yards more than Art Monk at this point of his career. The latter's best years were 5 and 6. So here's the thing about Art Monk. And obviously, he played in a different era, but Art put up some, and like you said, the best of Art Monk was about to be upon us in terms of catches, because I think there were a couple of 100-yard catch seasons in there for Arthur, and some big seasons yardage wise. Terry still hasn't had that breakout season. The consistency with which Terry is playing with is going to be paramount if he is to approach that level of status within the organization. So getting a quarterback that can offer him some consistency would help. But Art Monk dealt with the same thing. It was on a much lower scale because the early portion of Art Monk's career, it was all Joe Theismann up until 85. And then after that, it was like a carousel of quarterbacks, Jay Schrader and Doug Williams. And, you had revolving doors at quarterback. They were going around and around and around. But ultimately, that stabilized itself a little bit. Then Rippon came into the equation and kind of helped usher out Art Monk's, end of his Washington career. So it's about consistency for Terry, which has been his calling card to this point, and getting a quarterback that he can start to form some synergy with. If he can find a quarterback, we're hoping it's Jaden Daniels, and in the next 5 years he can go on a run with Jaden Daniels, we could easily see Terry ascend. Remember, he's playing in a different era too. More games, right? Art Monk played in a lot of, towards the end of his career, 16-game seasons. But remember, there were some seasons in there that were cut short because of strikes and things of that nature. So, you couple that stuff in there for Art Monk with Terry now playing in 17-game seasons, and they're pushing for 18 here. Before Terry's career is done, we may be talking about 18-game seasons. Terry, if he's healthy and he continues to produce, even if he doesn't have those high-level 1,500-yard seasons that we're looking for, if he just continues to produce at a 1,100-yard type pace, 70 catches, 1,100 yard, he's going to be up there when it's all said and done, just because of the sheer volume, right? It's a little bit different. Again, the era that he's playing in and the amount of games he's playing in 17-game seasons now too. So keep that in mind. But yeah, he could ultimately be the best receiver in franchise history, but that's saying a lot because, again, Art Monk, you got to also take it into consideration. When Art Monk left, when he retired from the league, he had the most catches in NFL history, right? He still owns most of the records for this team. Yards, no one's even close to him in yards. So, again, Terry's got a long ways to go, right? But it can be achieved if he continues on the path that he's on, right? So that's an interesting discussion to have maybe 2-3 years down the road, I think. Because also Terry needs to earn another contract here. That next extension, if Terry's still here, that's when we can start having that conversation, right? Because if for whatever reason Terry doesn't get extended here, then that's dead, right? We all expect him to be back, but you got to get to that point first, right? Colton Wheeler, stand up. You are the newest member of the MOBB. Really do appreciate you. Thank you for being a member of the MOBB. Colton Wheeler, welcome to the squad. Glad to have you on board. My guy, Colton Wheeler, thank you for being a member of the MOBB, the newest member of the MOBB, who writes, crazy to think if Jaden is our QB of the future, we're going to have to pay him close to 65, 70 million when it's time for his deal. It doesn't feel that long ago we were crying about franchising Kirk at 19 mil, then 24, when Kirk only wanted $48 million guaranteed, right? Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it doesn't feel that long ago, but that's the nature of the business. It's where the money's going. We saw the deal Tua got. Who thinks Tua's worth that kind of money? Jordan Love has 1 year of starting under his belt, and you see the contract he just got. That's the nature of the beast. You got to pay to play. If Jaden Daniels is half decent, you're going to have to pay him, right? So what we're hoping, that's a good problem to have, by the way. You want to have to pay a quarterback. We haven't had to pay a quarterback here in a very, very, very long time, okay? The one guy that we had to pay, we botched it miserably in Kirk Cousins. And so you're hoping 3 years from now, Jaden Daniels is everything that we thought he was and then some, and now we have to start figuring out to pay him. We got plenty of cap. Our cap situation isn't going to go off the rails here. We got responsible adults in the building that are going to take care of the cap. We got plenty of money to spare. And when it's time to pay a guy like Jaden Daniels, if he takes care of business, we'll be in a position. Once we do that, though, this is why it is important to take advantage of this window now. Like, if we could get Jaden to play really well, even if the record doesn't reflect that, if he plays really well, by next year, you can start saying, all right, let's start putting pieces in place to really go after it. If he plays really well and we win something like the Texans did last year, now you saw what the Texans did. They're all in, right? They're going after a chip now. I don't think we'll be in that position next year, but by year 3, still on that rookie contract, I think we might be in a position where we start saying, all right, we're ready to go. Let's get it going, right? But we'll see. But yeah, it's going to be up there. By the time it's time to, it's probably going to be north of that. 65, 70, it's probably going to be north of that. If the money keeps going up, which we have no reason to believe that it won't, it'd probably be north of that, which is crazy to think. I know. Again, that's a problem I can't wait for us to have. That means we got us one, right? David Brown, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. Double up. Thank you for doubling up. My guy, David, writes, first of all, thank you for the support and thank you for your generosity. Really do appreciate you. He says, Lou, I want to ask a tough question. Is Terry a legit number 1 wide receiver, or have we been blinded by fandom? On a contending team, is he a number 1 or a number 2? I think depending on where you put him, I think wherever you put Terry, he's a number 1 wide receiver. Let me stress that. Now, there are levels to number 1s. Terry isn't Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb. And there are a lot of fans that will make the case, well, you put him in a position where he's playing with a quarterback like some of those guys have, and he would be producing at that level. And my response to that is, there's a certain level of movement. There's a certain level of athleticism and quickness and change of direction and explosiveness and things of that. Like all of those parts that you have to be in that conversation. Terry McLaurin is not in that conversation to me, right? But that next tier down after those elite guys, that's where I think Terry belongs. So do I think he's a number 1? Yes, I do. And you put him on the Vikings, he's 1B to Justin Jefferson's 1A, right? You put him on the Bengals, he's 1B to Jamar Chase's 1A, right? Those guys are better than him. But Terry's not that far behind those guys. But he is behind those guys, right? So I do think he's a number 1. When you start talking about, is Terry top 10? No, he's not. I think that's where the fandom and fans being blinded sometimes comes into play, because you can name 10 receivers that some of y'all are like, no, that guy's not better than Terry. Yes, he is, right? But that's a debate that we can have because it's subjective, right? From a statistical standpoint, Terry's done some really impressive things with limited resources around him. A wise man once said, it's hard to do epic shit with basic people, right? Terry's had to do epic shit with basic quarterbacks in his career. So you want to give him the benefit of the doubt there. But even last year, I remember me and Derek B would talk about this all the time. There were times where Terry could have made Sam Howell right last year by making a play on the ball, and he just didn't make big plays last season. There were opportunities there, you know, And again, not that Sam was great. Sam was awful a lot of the time towards the end of the season last year. But, you know, you wanted to see Terry make him right more often, right? There were opportunities there. At the end of the day, I do think Terry's a number one receiver. And it doesn't matter where you put him, he'd be a number one. I think there are levels to being number ones. I think he's the middle tier of number one receiver. He's not the back end of the league number one. He's not the top end of the league number one. I think he's in the middle of the league as a number one wide receiver. And so I think if we're having a discussion about Terry McLaurin, he's like the 12th best receiver in the league, somewhere in there. I'm pretty sure if I made a list, you could get to about 11, 12, 13, somewhere in that neighborhood before you really start saying, all right, where do we fit Terry in here, right? When we start mentioning his name. So yes, I do think there is a bit of Homer-ism that goes into Terry McLaurin when we discuss him. But I also think that there is substance there. Terry is a real legitimate number one wide receiver in this league, no matter where you put him. But again, you put him on a team with a Justin Jefferson, a team with a Jamar Chase, a team with a CeeDee Lamb, or one of those, he'd be second on that team, not first, right? But every team doesn't have one of those. And most teams you put Terry on, like I think a real interesting debate, DJ Moore or Terry McLaurin, which one of those guys you taking? Like, that's a real conversation. I'd love to have that debate. You know what I'm saying? I'm probably still taking Terry over DJ Moore, but that's a real debate that you can have and real dialogue. They're in that same, to me, neighborhood of where they are as receivers, right? They're getting paid similar money. They got drafted the same year, if I'm not mistaken. So they're in that second tier, right? They're not in the upper echelon, but they're really good receivers in that second tier, right? That's kind of how I see it, but I digress. That's a great question to ask, David. It's a real question. It's a legitimate question. And it's a conversation that we could definitely have over and over and over again. And you'd probably get different answers every single time. I'm sticking true to my beliefs. I'm sticking to my guns. I think Terry is a number one receiver, but there's levels to this, right? So anyway, I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this installment of Training Camp Confidential, day number 5 of Training Camp. The Washington Commanders pads went on today. Brandon Coleman, very impressive. I'm starting to get excited about the prospects of him potentially starting as a rookie. Again, long way to go. Don't want to get too excited. Don't want to overinflate, the last 3 days where he's been running with the ones at left tackle, but it is promising that he's getting these reps. And for day one of the pads being on, he was impressive. That's a great sign, hopefully, of things to come. But really appreciate the support. Super Friends will be live tonight over on the Super Friends channel. So be on the lookout for that. Also, I'll be back with the LouieTeeNetwork podcast later on this evening as well. So I'll be very, very busy the rest of the evening. So looking forward to chopping it up with you guys. David Brown, thank you for the super chat. Greatly appreciate you. My guy, David Brown, writes, please do a video on it if you have the time, Lou. Interesting to say the least on the wide receiver one topic. You know what? I'll save that for a Saturday. One of these Saturdays where they don't have camp like they did this past weekend. We'll have that discussion. Or that week where there's no football, right? That week between the end of preseason and the start of the regular season, where there's that week of dead air, maybe we'll have that discussion then. We'll definitely have that discussion and talk about Terry and where he ranks and all of that good stuff. I think it is a really good, interesting conversation, to say the least. One that we can have dialogue, and we've done this before, right? We've had streams where we've talked about it, but I do think there is a place for that. We could definitely do that for sure. So I think it is a fascinating topic. I agree with you wholeheartedly. So we'll do that at some point. And I probably would like to do it live too, if at all possible. I may do it in a upload setting, or over the weekend, just to put out some content to keep the conversation going. Or, we'll do it in a live setting where we can have back and forth and bounce, conversation off of one another. So anyway, I digress. You guys know what it is. Post up. Take command. Super Friends tonight. Also, LouieTeeNetwork podcast tonight. lot to discuss. A lot of people getting paid. A lot of hold-ins, right? So we'll have some other discussions to have, as well as some other discussions, right? So look forward to chopping it up with you guys. Y'all know what it is. Take care. Have a good one. God bless. Good night. Pads are on.